Again, as an ex-banker myself, I know how incredibly important regulation and regulators are and the impact they can have on us as financial executives and partners and consultants to financial services businesses. So this conversation is around cloud transformation needs for highly regulated financial services landscapes. We're fortunate enough to have Michael Love with us. Michael is the technical lead for globally for IBM and the SAP partnership. So without further ado, I will hand over to Michael. Look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. What I want to do today is try to demystify some of the terminology and some of the concepts around moving financial services workloads to a public cloud. What I've experienced, I don't know if everybody has experienced the same thing, is that there's a lot of different usage of the word private cloud and the word public cloud. I personally have spent years trying to filter through the marketing and find out exactly what is under the covers. And hopefully I can kind of take advantage of some of that work that I've done and share with you to help demystify exactly what do you need and what's necessary to have in place in order to actually begin to move mission critical core banking, core insurance, right, capital market workloads into a public cloud. So to start off, we're going to talk about where are we today as far as financial services companies moving their existing workloads into the cloud. Right now, it's rather small. It's only 16%, right? So the question is, you know, why is it only 16%? And this is a good sort of slide to talk about a little bit of the scope of exactly what kind of workloads I'm going to be talking about today. So the reason why I think it's only 16% is because the majority that is running in the cloud today are mostly what I would call the edge applications, right? The applications at the edge that are already dealing with consumers, right? Where the consumers are working on the internet and where the data is already exposed to the internet. So it makes perfect sense to actually put the servers, right, for that data that's already out on the internet in a public cloud. So these things are like web servers, these things are like mobile applications, mobile deposit, mobile claim, right? And I would say these are probably the easy workloads, right? Even though they're actually rather complicated, I think most financial services companies have already embarked, right? So when we say 16%, we're not saying that only 16% of companies have actually started to move workloads to the cloud. We're saying probably more like 98% of financial services companies have moved workloads to the cloud, but it's more their edge workloads. The piece that's missing, the 84% that's missing, are the mission critical back office, core banking, general ledger, accounts payable, accounts receivable, risk management, banking analytics, core insurance capabilities, right? Policy management and claims, rating, underwriting, et cetera. These are the applications that represents that 84% that have not, gone into the cloud. So let's talk a little bit about why banks and insurance companies and other financial services companies have been slow to actually move this data across. Well, the first issue is that it becomes much, much more complicated to run things like compliance reports and audit reports when now you're moving from an environment where the software, the infrastructure, all of the people were all located right within the financial services organization's own data center IT department. They had control over the entire footprint, right? So when it became time to run an audit report, which could be 6 to 9 months in lengths, everything was at hand's length, right, for them to run that compliance report. As soon as you start looking at moving workloads into the cloud, you now actually have sort of a separation, right, of control. So, as an example, RISE with SAP has to be managed by a third company, a third-party company, right? The customer can no longer manage the SAP subscription license. If you're going to move it to the cloud, you're going to be moving it to, Azure, AWS, Google, IBM Cloud. So now there's another party that needs to be involved into the security compliance reports. And then finally, you've got SAP itself, right, where SAP comes up with new versions, right? Those new versions may have an impact, right, on your compliance reports. And if you now have a situation where the technology that you use to now consolidate, all the data that you need to run an audit report across these 4 entities, if your technology platform is email, well, then your compliance and audit, costs are probably going to go up. Since in the United States, right, with the introduction of Dodd-Frank, it's estimated that financial services companies and banks have spent up to $100 billion more in compliance and regulatory costs. The last thing that financial services companies are looking for is anything that's going to increase their costs. The idea here is that if we can provide a framework, so not just provide public cloud, right, which is a public cloud that anybody can use, if we can provide a framework that actually helps these entities all come together, if we can provide a framework that actually allows financial services companies to actually run audit reports from a single portal dashboard where all the entities are feeding into the same repository and dashboard, the idea is that not only can we make this process easier, but we could potentially even lower, right, security costs and compliance costs, as well as even make it more secure. The other thing that is actually keeping banks and insurance from moving into the cloud is just pure fear, right? The reality is that if you're running in the cloud every day, right, there's not a day that goes by that somebody isn't trying to break into that cloud. What this slide shows is across the bottom is the percentage of when the different types of things like cloud misconfiguration, right? How often is cloud misconfiguration responsible for the data breach? The vertical slide is the average amount of money, right? It actually costs an organization to deal with that type of data breach. And this is another example when we talk about scope, right? IBM has 2 different types of private cloud. We have one kind of private cloud. It doesn't really work like this, but I just want you to imagine it, right? Where we run basically a customer's servers in a physically isolated environment, right? So we provide the same cloud tools, such as spinning up a new VM, right? All the graphical capabilities and the graphical monitoring and all the automation, right? But what I want you to picture, though, is somebody wheeling a squeaky cart of a server, right, from the public area to the private public cloud area, right? And the problem with that is that it's expensive, right? You don't want to have any kind of manual work, right, to do that kind of private cloud. The goal of what we're talking about here is to move financial services applications into a true public cloud. So that's where we're talking about a huge data, a compute farm, a huge storage farm, right, and a huge network farm where a bank or insurance company could be running their VMs side by side with another, thousands of other companies, but actually be even more secure than what they used to have in their own private data center. So that's the goal of what we're trying to get to with this framework on top of a public cloud. We're trying to move away from a cloud that required some manual intervention into a cloud where everything, 100% of that is automated to actually reduce the costs without losing the security and without increasing the regulatory compliance costs. So how do we do this? And what this slide is what we've built within the IBM Cloud for Financial Services solution. So this is specific to IBM, but I would, literally all the concepts that I'm talking about here are equally applicable, right, to any hyperscaler platform, right, such as Azure, AWS, or GCP. The most important piece of this is the circle that you see, and you'll hear me talking a lot about 280 financial controls or 280 security controls. Effectively, what we're saying is that story about public cloud. What we're saying is that if you take a financial services workload and you ensure that you actually have these very regimented, well thought out 280 security controls, then your workload actually running in a public cloud would actually be more secure than your workload running in your own private on-prem data center, right? Because not only is it resilient to outside hacking, it's also even resilient to inside hacking as well. So the question is how do we come about with these 280 controls? Does IBM make it up ourselves and then actually provide this to our customers? And the answer is no, right? So the first thing that we do is we actually have a cloud framework council. And this council is made up of different financial services companies, which then feed into and are constantly improving these different 280 different security controls. IBM also acquired a company called Promontory. We acquired Promontory because they were leaders in the industry for taking all the different regulatory financial services bodies and interpreting that into, what does that mean for an IT organization, right? So how do those government regulations interpret to a data center, as an example? And then the last piece is, we're using different industry standards. On the next slide that I have, we'll go into some of the different industry standards that actually feed into these 280 security controls. In addition to the circle, you have what's underneath, which is basically an out-of-the-box recommended cloud architecture framework. So as an example, you need to have security segmentation between, let's say, the management layer, right, and where the customer's actual SAP servers are running. You need to have a jump server over here. You need to be able to have administrative needs to have different access than the end users. And all of that needs to be, pre-planned, pre-built specifically for SAP, running in the cloud. Item number 2 are the actual cloud services that are available on each cloud. So obviously you need compute services, but almost any application running in the cloud is also going to need things like backup services. It's going to need jump services. It's going to need a common logging service, right? So the next thing that we did is we took, basically all of our existing cloud services, and we took roughly 25 out of 200 of those, and we said these are essential, right, for financial services and banking. And we actually took those 280 security controls, and we made sure that those specific services were compliant with those 280 financial services controls. The third part of this is then to actually open up an ecosystem to actually where third-party companies can participate in this framework, right, that we have created. So SAP is one of the partners, right, in our financial services partner ecosystem, where we've actually gone through and we have taken these security controls and we've validated SAP S/4HANA and also Sybase ASE on top of to make sure that both of those application platforms are compliant with these 280 controls. In addition to SAP, we have roughly 90 other, right, financial services applications and fintechs, which have also validated, right, and are also going through this process. So now, normally a bank, right, would need to go through roughly 6 months with each and every application that they may want to bring into a public cloud environment. We've basically taken that 6 months off the table. And it doesn't reduce it down to 0, but maybe what we can do is we can reduce it down to maybe now we only have 15 days or a month, right, to take this basically plethora of pre-validated applications which are guaranteed to be compliant with these 280 financial services controls. And then the very last piece of it, the fourth piece, is the fact that you can take any hyperscaler today and you can manually configure 280 security controls on that hyperscaler, right? It's very labor intensive, but the problem is that on day 1, right, you are definitely secure. But the problem is that you then have to have day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6. So you need to have, right, that dashboard that tells you that every day, where are we on, compliance with the 280 controls, right? And also serve as the place where, the different, entities which are participating in this solution can contribute. Just a little more detail on the Financial Services Cloud Council. So again, roughly 55 firms represented, right, in IBM's Cloud Financial Council, roughly 85 executive members. What I've done is I've highlighted our anchor banks, which have signed up, right, for the IBM Cloud for Financial Services, right, where they have basically picked IBM as their cloud platform of choice, right? Because of this framework that we have in place. And so our anchor banks have a lot of influence, right, over these security controls, as well as all 55 firms represented have influence. So I wanted to provide this slide because I briefly kind of touched on what industry controls, feed into this. What I can tell you is that the primary components that fed into our 280 controls was ISO 27001, as well as the NIST 800-53. But then we also use our promontory services, right? Our promontory services actually also are experts, right, on European Banking Authority, European Central Bank, BaFin. So what we've done is this is like a canonical mesh of the best pieces of each one of these different industry standards, right, which has now fed into this sort of this preferred list of 280 controls. And the idea is it would be a travesty to have every single financial services company repeat, right, the work that we've done to look at all these different, regulatory entities and actually pick out, right, the best security controls across all these different standards. The other great thing that we have with Promontory is Promontory offers a service such that if there are changes, right, so Promontory is constantly monitoring changes, right, to NIST 853, to BaFin. So if there's a change that happens in, let's say, BaFin that actually would result in making a change to your IT data center, Promontory actually provides an alert service, right, for anybody who might be interested, right, in that regulatory change, and to alert them to know that they need to make a change, right, within the IT environment. So again, we're actually doing this as part of the packaged service, right, of anybody running on IBM Cloud for Financial Services. And then the last piece, again, is that dashboard. And that dashboard is showing you, where are you, right, on these 280, security controls? Are any of these security controls, not in place? Because literally on day 1, where you may actually have a security control that you think is in place, but that is not in place, that may be the day that you could actually end up with a data breach. So it's essential to have that graphical front end, which actually tells you, are you secure, are you not secure, right, in your public cloud, as well as it's really important to have your managed services provider, right, your application provider, your cloud provider to have a central place to actually load up. Your cloud provider needs to do things for you, right, to make sure that you are compliant, right? Your SAP needs to do, or we've already done the validation from SAP, but if SAP has a version, upgrade, right, they need to revalidate, the new version of SAP. So it's very important to have that place for everybody to feed into and reduce costs. And finally, like I said, what we've done, we've spent, this is fairly recent, where SAP has spent roughly 9 months with IBM, and we've done a very intensive project to take, SAP S/4HANA, as well as SAP ASC, right, or the Sybase technology, which is very, very popular, right, in the financial services industry. And we've spent months making sure that the SAP application platform, as well as the SAP architecture, were compliant, right, with these security controls that IBM has created. So they're an official part of our ecosystem, and again, the idea is that banks can move forward with potentially running these applications without having to do the security validation themselves, right, to get these applications running. And with that, that is the end of my presentation, and I open up to any questions.
Thank you. We do have a question for you. Do you provide unrestricted access to banks and their auditors?
Do
you provide unrestricted access to banks and their auditors?
So it's an interesting question. So in a managed environment, we do not provide unrestricted access, right? So as an example, if you were to run RISE with SAP, we can't provide unrestricted access, right? Because RISE with SAP is a software as a service. So the idea with RISE is you get, right, basically the SAP GUI, you work with the SAP GUI, you don't have unrestricted access, right, to the SAP environment. If you were to run, let's say, in a let's say a perpetual license, right, within on top of the IBM cloud, it's possible that you could potentially get unrestricted access. The other thing that I want you to remember as well is that, let's say you are running RISE with SAP. So, you need to think of things as being inside of like a black box, right? But within SAP, you still have all the web APIs in and out of that black box. And where you actually do your extensions and where you actually add other applications can also be in a private public cloud. I hope that makes sense to you now that I've gone through this description. Or it could be in an actual, single tenant private cloud, and so it's still running within the same cloud data center location. And so we can also have different domains, right, where maybe you don't have full access to your RISE with SAP domain, but you do have full access to, let's say, some custom applications, right, that are running side by side, right, with your SAP application.
Wonderful, thank you. And I think that's it for questions. Ladies and gentlemen, can we thank Michael for his expertise? Thank you very much.